Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm really pleased so many of you could join us for our webinar today. It's an exciting topic and one that we're going to delve into with several different speakers. Our topic is, with global food security under threat, new climate insights can help you manage your business. Thanks to Maxar Intelligence for sponsoring this event and making it possible. Today, we're going to hear from our distinguished speakers with facilitated questions and answers. I'm going to make very brief speaker introductions and encourage you to dig into their full biographies on our website. We also want to hear from you, the attendees today, so that we can make this very interactive. Feel free to offer questions in the Q&A portion at the bottom of your screen, not the chat box. And if you are experiencing any technical issues, please use the Q&A function to let us know, and our team will assist you. In addition, we're going to be recording today's webinar, so you can look for it later on to review. It should be available tomorrow on agri-pulse.com. So let's start off with our first speaker, Ambassador Kip Tom. Ambassador Kip Tom is the CEO of Tom Farms in Leesburg, Indiana. He previously served as the United States Ambassador to the United Nations Agencies for Food and Agriculture and Chief of the U.S. Mission to the UN agencies in Rome from 2019 to 2021. He oversaw the largest contributions to UN food programs and dealt with all sorts of issues, whether it's emergency assistance, safety standards, agriculture, fisheries, forest, and rural development financing. Tom's diligent efforts to modernize agriculture and increase sustainability have enhanced U.S. objectives in foreign policy and in agricultural priorities. Please welcome Kip Tom.
Well, thank you, Sarah. Appreciate that very kind and generous welcome to the event today. I want to thank Maxar for making sure this happened, and everybody at Agri-Pulse that's been a part of setting this up. I'll start out by saying this, so I had a unique opportunity of being a farmer for nearly the last 50 years of my life, then to serve in Rome, Italy, to the Rome-based UN food and ag agencies, where we had a global footprint of trying to make sure that we create resilience and capacity in food systems to serving our humanitarian needs around the world when needed. But at the same time, we were really focused on collecting data so we could be more responsive, whether it was in building that resilience or whether it was in conducting those humanitarian operations, make sure we were at the right place at the right time. It gave us the ability to look around the corner. So next slide. So when we look, I'll start out first with saying, obviously in 50 years of agriculture, we've been involved in some form of digitalization of our own business for probably the past 25 years. It continues to increase at a rapid pace. And today I can tell you we produce nearly 2 terabytes of data a year just on our operation alone. So you can tell the intensity of collecting data is very good on a lot of larger farms across the United States, because we understand the value it contributes in, as I said in this slide here, productivity gains, efficiency improvements, and making sure that we operate in a manner that's consistent with our environmental concerns, and obviously lowering our CO2 footprint by making sure that we can reduce our use of anything related to increasing those CO2 emissions. But I'll say this, as we manage irrigation systems, we manage variable rate technologies. This isn't our office on the screen here, but it's almost like that. We probably deal with 12 or 13 different platforms in the way we manage our crop. It's the only way that we can really increase productivity at the rate we have. And as I said earlier, a lot of U.S. farms are embracing these technologies. A lot of companies are involved with it. And it's just one step into the future that we need to keep moving forward with. I'll say this, we think we're making big steps today, but we got a lot further to go. And I'm excited about the future of agriculture, especially as we continue to digitize and leverage satellite technologies as we are today. Next slide. So in my service in Rome, Italy, as Sarah mentioned, we dealt with World Food Program, where we at one time we had a budget of nearly $14 billion, feeding about 140 to 150 million people at any one time around the world. At the same time, we know that we got nearly 800 million to upwards of a billion people hungry across the world. And we ask ourselves, what can we do to be better informed, to make sure we make decisions and allocate those dollars properly to make sure that we're meeting our goals of being efficient and making sure we reach the right people at the right time. I think the case of Bangladesh, we have nearly a million people in an internment camp there that has been almost in 4 generations. We know that's going to continue on because there's just no other hope for them at this point in time. But when we get to the Sahel of Africa and we see this constant desertification continue to march its way south, we start to say to ourselves, what is going on with the climate that we're seeing this desertification continue to move south, reducing the productivity of the continent itself? I think as well as how we use some of these satellite technologies. I remember the African desert locust that came through Pakistan, across the Arabic Peninsula, and on into the Sahel of Africa, in particular in Ethiopia, where we said we can do better in trying to monitor where these insects are at. We was running nearly a $300 million budget to try to control them because we knew the threat to our food security was going to be close to $1 or $2 billion in cost if we didn't control them. But we were using NASA data, we were using NOAA data, and then we would hire young people with cell phones with GPS technologies to go out and ground truth what was going on. And we actually reduced the amount of chemistries we had to use. We were more effective in controlling the insects and found a lot of success with that. That's just one example, but we can do a lot more. When I think about the rest of the Sahel of Africa, we see declining water resources and a lot of need to, again, to leverage up some of these technologies that we've used in the United States for 25 years, but some that are just going to leapfrog past us and hopefully bring a solution to a lot of those developing countries across the world. When I look at this map, I think of everything it delivers on. It looks at weather hazards, looks at floods, droughts. We're looking at biomass index charts. There's a lot of things that go into play when we look at this and try to predict where we needed to deliver food resources, or we could create more resiliency and capacity. Next slide, please. So what information is needed to feed that growing world? As you can see on the screen here, there's a number of different levels of information that we need, but I don't need to read them off to you, but you can see them there. But I think this list is going to continue to grow. There's no doubt that our ability to collect information, it's there today, whether it's what we can do with our ground-based information and data systems to what we can do with satellites. We certainly can do a lot better in increasing productivity, reducing our carbon footprint, lowering the cost of food per consumer, and at the same time, making sure that we meet the needs of those that are most food insecure at any one time. Next slide. So when we look at global food security, it depends on actionable insights. We know in agriculture, we're dealing with biology. We know that we're dealing with a situation where we don't have time to wait till tomorrow or the day after. We need actionable insights that we can move upon today. And my belief is, I know in our own farm, and as I look around the world and know that all societies are only 3 meals from chaos. We can't wait to make decisions. We need to make decisions now. So I say this phrase very often, but faster adaptation to innovation needs to occur to meet the numerous global challenges, as our ability to innovate is not limited by our access to technology. It is only limited by our ability to dream. And I believe it's time that agriculture and those in the tech field and those in digital services, along with USDA and others, make sure that we can fulfill our promises in making sure we have a food secure world. Thank you. I look forward to the questions.
Thank you, Kip. It's just amazing all the work that you were able to do while you were in Rome and continue to do on behalf of American agriculture. So we look forward to asking you some more questions as we continue with our program. Next up, I'd like to welcome Bill Hohenstein. Bill is the director of USDA's Office of Energy and Environmental Policy within the Office of the Chief Economist at USDA. OEEP houses the Climate Change Program Office, the Office of Energy Policy and New Uses, and the Office of Environmental Markets. The office manages the department's greenhouse gas inventory and assessment program, and Bill co-chairs the USDA Climate Hub's Executive Committee. OEEP coordinates the department's efforts to address the causes and the consequences of climate change and focuses on efforts to enhance USDA's ability to evaluate renewable energy and resources, build climate resilient and sustainable farms, ranches, rural lands, and rural communities, as well as expand markets for conservation and environmental goods, and support farmer conservation decision-making. You can tell he's a very busy man, and we're delighted to have him share today what's happening with from USDA's perspective. So please welcome Bill.
Well, thank you, Sarah, and thanks to the folks from Agri-Pulse and Maxar for hosting the event. It's great to be here with Kip Tom and others to talk about what USDA is doing to help farmers and rural communities and our stakeholders manage climate risks. So next slide. Yeah, so I've been with USDA for 24 years now, and I've seen a lot of changes over that time. I think one thing maybe the Agri-Pulse community doesn't need to understand, but when I talk with folks out in the public, just understanding the breadth of the work that USDA does by the numbers. You know, so we have close to 100,000 employees and multiple agencies and missionaries that have responsibilities for everything from U.S. forests to promoting rural economic development, to assessing agricultural pests and diseases, to working internationally on everything from disaster relief to food assistance. So really quite an extensive breadth of work across USDA, almost all of which is dependent on having a stable climate system and is going to be affected by climate change. So next slide. So just to level set on what we are seeing, the next slide, we are certainly seeing changes in climate across the United States and across the globe. These changes aren't uniform. We see more warming in the winter months than in the summer. We see changes in precipitation where parts of the West where they're already water limited are getting drier, and parts of the East are getting wetter. And in fact, we're seeing more extreme weather events in the Eastern US as well. And so not only are we seeing climate change, we're seeing changes in the patterns of both temperature and precipitation across the US. So next slide. So how is USDA responding? Again, our response needs to be comprehensive. We have a department-wide climate adaptation plan, and then each of our agencies has their own climate adaptation plan. As part of that plan, we needed to identify where the risks were coming from. And for USDA, we identified 5 major elements. Certainly, the effect of climate change on agricultural productivity and forest productivity, the effects of climate change on water availability, both water quantity and quality, the effects that climate change can have on rural communities, and actually the disproportionate effects that it can have on lower income and vulnerable communities. The shocks due to climate change, that's everything from droughts to fire to changes in pests and disease outbreaks. For most of our stakeholders, the most immediate effect that they're going to see from climate change are going to be in these changes in extreme events and disasters. And then finally, looking at the effect of climate change on our infrastructure. So our public lands, how it affects our national forest system, how it affects the roads that are within those systems, and how it affects our departmental infrastructure as well, everything from our buildings to our labs. So quite a bit to manage, and a lot of threats coming from climate change from multiple directions. Next slide. And our response also needs to be comprehensive. Luckily, there's a lot of synergies between improving overall health of our systems and climate resilience. So when we think about improving soil health, improving organic matter in the soil, making soils more resilient to both drought and extreme precipitation events, and improving forest health. Much of what we've been preaching over the last century when it comes to resource conservation align really closely with the efforts that we need to take to make these systems more resilient to a changing climate. We're working on outreach and education. We have a network of 11 regional climate hubs to help promote climate smart strategies. Again, USDA is a science-based agency. It really comes down to the data. And here we're making an effort to ensure that our stakeholders have access to the latest data and the tools that they can use to manage that data and information to make better decisions. A lot of what we're focused on is still in the research and development realm. When we look at the long-term nature of climate change and how to manage these risks, technology is going to be critical. And that's everything from creating more drought tolerance in commodities to having orchards that have lower chilling hour requirements, to innovations in information technology where we can create better tools that can support farmer decision making. And then finally, what we've been doing across the department is not thinking about climate change as something separate and something that we add on to our other responsibilities. We've been integrating our work on climate change and climate planning in particular into the day-to-day work that we do. So we're thinking about climate change not as something that is an extra, but certainly integral to our work. Next slide. So I'm going to give a couple of examples of how that plays out in our day-to-day work. I mentioned access to climate data, and we have a whole series of tools that we're providing our stakeholders. As we develop these tools, it's really critical to listen to the growers, to forest managers on what their risks are, what they perceive their risks to be, what climate information is important, whether the threats are, say, from an increase in a disease or a pest that might be prevalent, to changes in humidity, to changes in freeze dates, to drought. And dependent on where those risks are and what the farmers or producers think of when it comes to their information needs, we design those tools to help them manage the risks that they see. A really good example of that, next slide, is some work that we've done with our Southeast Climate Hub and the University of Florida on a tool called Agri-Climate. And it provides a range of climate services to growers across the Southeast. In particular, there's a good example with the peach producers in Georgia. And there's a county in Georgia called Peach County, and it's called Peach County for a reason. It is at the center of Georgia's peach growing region. And in order to produce a viable peach crop, the trees need to go through a certain senescence, and they need to have a certain number of chilling hours every winter in order for the flowers to set fruit. And that magic number for Georgia peaches is around 850 hours. And so if you get 850 hours of temperatures below 45 degrees, the growers are going to produce a good peach crop. And historically, that has not been a problem in Peach County, Georgia. But what we've seen really over the past 2 decades is a march towards lower and lower numbers of chilling hours each year. And in fact, in that 2016, 2017 winter, they were well below the 850 hours, and it lost roughly 80% of their peach crop. And so really important economic impact on the peach growers of Georgia. This information can be really helpful to them. Next slide. Because not only are we providing them those numbers annually, but we can provide those numbers in real time. And so they can determine in December or January whether they're on track to meet the requirements that the crop needs. And there are things they can do. There are things they can manage. There's a spray called Dormex that can help the peach crop set fruit even if they don't get enough chilling hours. There's also longer term decisions they can make. They can replace the current orchard with a cultivar that has lower chilling hour requirements, or in many cases switch to another crop like blueberries. So next slide. Scaling up, one of the greatest challenges we're going to face within agriculture in the U.S. is the challenge of water management in the western states. As I mentioned, with climate change, the West is getting drier. It's also getting hotter, which is causing more evapotranspiration and water stress, and more of the water storage, which is stored largely in snowpack, is melting earlier and running off earlier. So when we look at long-term challenges of climate change, one of the critical areas of threats within the U.S. is going to be in the western states and really involves water availability and supply. And so the department announced a Western Water Framework in 2023. It involves work across multiple agencies, including NRCS and FSA and RMA and RD and the research agencies. It allows us to think about how we integrate the work we're doing through our conservation programs with work we're doing to help develop infrastructure and creating new and innovative ways to manage water. Next slide. For example, we're working with producers in the western states to develop market incentives to use water more efficiently, and working with regional water districts and irrigation districts through that. And so, again, it's a more comprehensive approach, thinking about strategically Western water supply as an important strategic issue for U.S. agriculture, and creating a framework that involves all of the agencies across the department. So, last slide. So being someone that's worked on climate change for most of my career, you might think that I wouldn't be optimistic. I am, I think, inherently optimistic, though. I think about the work that we do. We're definitely seeing farmers adapt to climate change. I would say most of what we're seeing today is that they're adapting to what they're seeing today. So a lot of this adaptation is reactive to what they're seeing. And we're moving to a situation where we can provide the information and the data and the projections to allow them to be more proactive in their adaptation responses. An incredible amount of innovation that occurs on the farm, and a lot of technology is going to be critical to helping us manage these challenges in the future. And that technology is everything from the kinds of information technologies that you're going to be hearing from Maxar about to, again, changes in cultivars, genetic improvements, the whole host of things that we can do. There are some real challenges, and I think, as Kip mentioned, the challenges globally are much more pressing and dire. The ability to adapt is more limited. The access to technology and information is more limited, and so some of the challenges that we face in the U.S. we're also going to see globally, and the capacity to adapt is much more limited. And again, what we see if we're not able to address climate change and the causes of climate change, what we're likely to see is not only a continuation of the changes we're seeing, but an acceleration. So we're seeing about 0.2 degrees of warming per decade. And we've seen that for the past few decades. Some of the projections have that accelerating to 0.5 to 0.6 degrees per decade by the mid to the later parts of the century. So that will make our adaptation challenges much more difficult to address. So why don't I stop there and pass things back to Sarah? Thank you very much again.
Thank you, Bill. You really set the stage there for a lot of the basics behind what USDA is doing and what we need to be thinking very closely at, thinking and looking at closely from in the future. So thank you. We'll look forward to some more questions, both from me and from the audience in our Q&A section with you. We've got one more speaker to present here, and I'd like to introduce Kyle Tapley to join us. He serves as a meteorologist and senior sales manager at Maxar Intelligence. He joined the team following his graduation from Penn State University in 2008 with a degree in meteorology. Kyle has more than a decade of experience forecasting weather for major crop areas all around the world, and he has an emphasis on how weather and climate conditions affect the production of agricultural commodities. Please welcome Kyle.
Well, thank you, Sarah, for that introduction. Also want to take the opportunity to thank Kip and Bill for joining us today and providing their insights. It's been great so far. So as Sarah mentioned, I'm a meteorologist with Maxar, and what I wanted to share today is a case study that we put together using our weather desk and particularly our climate desk tools at Maxar to illustrate how having access to better insights on weather and climate can enable better decision making for agriculture. So next slide. So what we focused on for this case study is Mato Grosso. For those who aren't aware, Mato Grosso is a very important growing region within Brazil. And obviously Brazil is a very important agricultural production country. So Mato Grosso is the top corn and soybean producing state within Brazil. So that's one of the reasons we picked it for this case study. Also, we are now moving into the South American growing season here in the coming weeks. So thought it would be kind of a great time for that. In addition to grains and oil seeds, it also has a big cattle ranching area as well, and generally has historically a very favorable climate for crops, a wet climate, and a very long growing season. We also picked this region because we've seen some significant climate shifts here, even in the past 10 plus years. And so that's what we wanted to kind of analyze here with our climate tools and understand how things may be shifting. What you see on this screen is that this is an area that has also seen a lot of deforestation, as we've seen forest land converted over to pasture and cropland over the past 10, 15, 20 years. And that we think is also playing in a role, in addition to just the general warming we've seen globally. The deforestation, I think, for this particular area is also leading to some shifts in climates that we can identify. Next slide, please. Here we go. So one of the things we wanted to focus on in this case study is decreased rainfall that we've seen, particularly in the early part of the rainy season. And that's generally September and October, the first couple of months of the rainy season in Mato Grosso there in northern Brazil. And so what you can see on this slide is on the left-hand map, we looked at the past 10 years rainfall in September and October, and then compared it to a longer-term average. And you can see with the yellows and oranges there, how those areas in northern Brazil, including, again, Mato Grosso, the big production state, have seen below normal rainfall at the start of the rainy season recently. And then on the right-hand side, this is our projection for the next couple of months. Again, we're expecting below normal rainfall in those same areas. Again, we think this is at least partially due to recent deforestation that is lowering the humidity levels in these areas, and then in turn leading to a very slow start to the rainy season that can have an impact on crops. Next slide, please. So if we project this forward using some of our climate tools here, we can see that if we just look at annual rainfall for the whole year, we're expecting over the next 25 years a decline of about 8% in total rainfall. But if we look more specifically at September and October, again, the first couple of months of the rainy season, that's when we're seeing the most dramatic decline in precipitation. So just looking at September and October, we're projecting over the next 25 years about a 42% decrease in rainfall. So you can see that illustrated by the two maps up at the top. One is showing 2025 September, October projection for rainfall, and then 2050 projection on the right-hand side. And so you can see the decline there. And then down below, the chart is showing the year-by-year September and October rainfall, and how you can see that very clear downward trend in precipitation. And so this is an important time of the year because it is the start of the growing season, and typically you need some rain to be able to get the crops growing, because there is a very distinct, again, rainy and dry season in Mato Grosso. And if we see a delay in soybean planting, that can then have a follow-on delay in the winter corn crop, which is actually the biggest, again, corn crop in Brazil is that winter corn crop, the safrinha corn. So any kind of shifts in the rainfall patterns can have an impact on when crops are grown and potentially shorten the growing season. Next slide, please. Something else we have been identified as a kind of a climate change here is temperatures. And last season in Brazil was a huge example of this. It was by far the hottest growing season on record. If we look at September through February of the previous growing season, Mato Grosso saw temperatures anywhere from above 5 degrees warmer than normal over the course of the entire growing season. So extremely hot weather, especially early in the growing season. Again, we saw temperatures breaking records almost every day in Mato Grosso, really extreme heat, and obviously leading to stress on crops. And then on the right-hand side, you'll see our projection, again, for this current growing season, September through February. And again, we're expecting above normal temperatures across most of South America, but again, in Mato Grosso and some of the key growing areas there in Brazil. Next slide, please. Okay, so if we're looking at the projections, again, 25 years out, like we did for rainfall, but we're looking at a little bit different perspective here for temperatures. What we did here is we're looking at setting a critical threshold and seeing how many days are we going to be exceeding that threshold. So we set the threshold at 95 degrees Fahrenheit or 35 degrees Celsius, which is when you begin to see stress on crops if you get temperatures above those levels for a significant period of time. So in the current climate, we're looking at about 50 days per year. When we exceed that threshold across Mato Grosso, it is a relatively warm area. But if we project that forward to 2050, so 25 years in the future, we're looking at almost tripling that to 150 days or even more per year with temperatures exceeding 95 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's what the maps on the top are showing you, the number of days that we're exceeding that threshold. And you can see the expansion across Brazil in the 2050 map. And then down below the chart showing the year by year number of days we're projecting to be above 95 based off of various climate models. And you can see the very clear increase in that number of days that's going to be exceeding that threshold. So the combination of, again, changes in the rainy season when that's starting, potentially condensing of when you get the rainfall across Mato Grosso, in addition to the extreme heat, increased frequency, longer duration of the extreme heat events that we do see, all could be leading to issues for crops across Mato Grosso. And that's something that then people can keep in mind, those who have interest in Mato Grosso, those who are trading, those who have any type of assets in Mato Grosso can then make better decisions by understanding how things are expected to be trending in the decades to come. Next slide, please. So all of these, insights and maps and data that I was able to pull together for this case study came from our Weather Desk and primarily, again, our Climate Desk platform, which is, allows users to, pull all those various data sets and look at them in a way that's easily consumable in the map form, setting those different thresholds, the data itself, and then, again, enabling you to make better decisions by having access to those various insights. Next slide, please. And when it comes to those different insights, it's all customizable. So like I said, you can set different thresholds. We set a specific threshold for temperatures, but if it's different for different crops, you can do that yourself. It is global in coverage, so you can look at different growing areas all around the world. I know, as Bill mentioned, there is obviously changing climate, but the way that changes is manifests itself in different ways in different parts of the world. And also, obviously, different crops have different needs. But things like temperature, precipitation, growing degree days are all included within the platform. All of it can be integrated into your workflow, either through a data feed or through the platform itself. And we're looking at longer term projections here. Our weather products are more shorter term, looking at the next 15 days or so. With climate, you can look longer term out through the end of the century. Now, obviously, a forecast for a single day, 60 years in the future is not going to be all that useful. But what we're looking at here is the longer term trends. How are things trending? And then, what insights can we glean from that? And then again, how can we use those to make better decisions for agriculture? So next slide. So we will be sending out our 18-month Ag Outlook for climate to all of the attendees. So be on the lookout in your inbox. You can also get more information by a couple of the different web links that we have up here on the screen to get more info on the platform itself, or request a trial, or you can simply reach out to me. You can see my contact details there, or Sean Miller, my colleague who's the product manager for our climate products. We'd be happy to set up a demo, set up a trial, let you see a little bit more about the tool itself. So with that, I think I'll hand it back over to Sarah.
Thank you, Kyle. I appreciate that very much. And I think it's a great opportunity to combine all of our speakers now back on the screen, and also welcome Sean Miller, who you mentioned. He's the lead product manager for climate environmental products for Maxar Intelligence. He leads the strategy, development, and delivery of climate intelligence solutions through the Climate Desk platform at Maxar. Sean leads market research, roadmap development, and cross-functional collaboration, shaping vague value propositions and working closely with customers. And so I'm glad to have everybody on screen now. And we're also really happy to see some questions come in already. I'm going to start with just a couple for everyone, and then we'll go to the questions from the audience. Kip, I'd like to go back to you to kick off here. You gave us some good examples of how the data was captured and able to inform some of your decision making, especially with the grasshopper infestation. And I wondered if you might share just a little bit more about how you were able to deploy resources more efficiently, just as a result of some of the data that you were able to capture in some of these very remote regions of the globe.
Yeah, so absolutely. Resources are hardly available in a lot of these developing areas around the world. The money, the capital is not there to invest in them. Farmers don't have access to them. But one of the things that I noticed the biggest difference between the U.S. and probably most all of Africa, the Middle East, and some of Southeast Asia and part of Latin America is that we've invested in the tools, not only on our farm, of digitization of our farms, but at the same time, we've had the ability to access GM technologies. We've been able to use these digital tools to reduce our use of fertilizer, reduce our use of chemistry. So we've had, hopefully we're having an impact, a positive impact on the climate, but around the world, those tools just aren't available. So for us, when we get into these remote areas, the only thing we can do to try to measure and monitor is through the use of satellite technologies to gather information, whether it's biomass index maps, whether it's tracking of ocean freight that's maybe carrying food resources or fertilizer in, what's going on in different ports around the world, migration flows. It's interesting how you can actually track the number of people moving through certain areas of out of Africa up into the Middle East or on up into Europe. So there's a lot of different things we can do with satellites that give us the ability to have better knowledge, to make better decisions, to make sure we're meeting those that are food insecure around the world and increasing resiliency and capacity in farming systems.
Thanks for that insight. And Bill, you talked a lot about all the different things that USDA is doing, and it's a very comprehensive set of programs and research that's going on. I wonder if you just might shed a little bit of light, given that your career has spanned so many years at the agency, how you've seen this change. Is the speed of the changes that we're seeing on climate that much quicker? Or what kind of perspective can you share for our listeners in terms of the changes that you've witnessed over your career?
Yeah, Sarah, that's I guess a polite way to say, hey, Bill, you've been around for a while. Yeah, I started at USDA in August of 2000. And so definitely have seen a lot over my career at USDA, and then prior to that when I was at the Environmental Protection Agency. I think U.S. agriculture has changed a lot as well. I think some of it's happened slowly, so people haven't perceived it, but definitely a lot of genetic improvements have improved productivity, but also improved the resilience of our major commodity crops. When you compare, say, the drought of 2012 to the drought in 1988, those droughts were very similar from a meteorological perspective, but really different in terms of how farmers were affected. There was a lot more deployment of conservation practices and improvements in soil health, and then just genetic improvements in the crops that made them more drought tolerant. So we've seen the benefits of technology domestically in terms of allowing farmers to manage the changes that they're seeing. We're also definitely seeing a change in perception. I think, it's definitely, when I started in 2000, a lot of questions around climate change, a lot of skepticism. I think today folks recognize what's happening. They're seeing it on the ground, and there's a real pragmatic approach to saying, okay, well, let's manage what we have in front of us and let's deal with what we're seeing.
All right, thank you. Good perspective. Question for you, Kyle. You talked about actionable insights. Give us some examples of how agribusinesses can leverage both this shorter range weather forecast and the longer term to help their customers manage climate risk.
Sure, and I might turn to Sean for can follow up on this as well. But, for shorter term, obviously there's more day-to-day operations on what's happening, hour by hour or day by day. And we certainly have, tools for that. And I think that's something that people are kind of familiar with and have, had access to for a while is, you can see what the forecast is for the next few days and plan for that. But I think what we're trying to do with climate now is understand, okay, what's going to be happening for the rest of this season and the following season, and then what can we do in terms of maybe we want to lean towards a certain variety of crop or a certain crop over another because the risk is pointed one way or the other, and then longer term making more significant decisions in terms of how things are trending in the longer term, where you can make probably, if you have, for instance, assets or you're looking at building a new facility or something like that, and understanding what are the risks climate-wise, if we're looking decades into the future, because this is going to be something that we're going to have for, not just a single day or a single year. This is something we're investing in for decades to come. So, that's what we're trying to do with Climate Desk, is provide those longer-term trends, help you understand what are the risks of extreme events and how those are changing in certain areas around the world. Because like we said, not everywhere is seeing the same type of trends. It is specific to different regions. So being able to understand how that's changing in different regions of the world and how it matters for where you are, and then making better decisions as a result of that.
Thank you. Sean, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I think Kyle covered it pretty well. While weather forecasts can become much less reliable beyond 10 to 15 days, Climate Desk focuses on long-term climate trends that give you a broader, more strategic outlook. So it really provides you a framework for exploring how different global economic and social trends may unfold. For instance, in Mato Grosso, projections of significant rainfall decline during key planting seasons can help, agribusinesses adjust crop species, water management, and crop rotations. So rather than relying on daily weather specifics, Climate Desk really, with the forward-looking climate data, helps you see those overarching patterns and empower you to plan with confidence and build more resilience.
And this kind of leads to one of the questions that came in from Pierre in our audience, wanted to know, do you have the 25-year prior data available for your Brazil example? I don't know how long you've been doing this, but there was a question about looking even longer term at the trends.
Right. So we do have the historical information that goes back further than that. I personally didn't pull that for this case study, but it's something we can do. So we have data that goes back to, globally back to, the early 80s. So that's certainly something we can do. I just didn't do it for this case study, but Pierre, if you want to follow up on that, we certainly can.
Right. And on this theme of actionable insights, Kip, just put your farmer hat on. I know you're on your farm there with that great background. And all the data that you're capturing, can you give us some examples of how perhaps you're making changes in your farm management as a result?
Well, I don't think there's any question. We're seeing rainfall events that are larger in the amount of rain that we receive. I don't remember very many times in my farming history where we would get 5 and 6 inch rains. And over the past 10 years, we've gotten a number of those. At the same time, I've seen our climate, our atmosphere actually clean up a little bit. We happen to be just south and east of the steel mills in Chicago, where they now don't burn sulfur in their high sulfur coal. And so our atmosphere has cleared up a little bit, and that's given us a little bit more direct sunlight. So at the end of the day, that coupled with some of the rain, the more wetter seasons we're seeing, we used to get 38 inches of rainfall a year on the average. I think now we're well over 40. There's no question we might be a benefactor. But again, I emphasize the fact that we've got the ability with the tools and genetics and agronomic practices to adapt and to continue to stay ahead of the curve. I share this story oftentimes. My father, when he first started farming with his father, was producing 30 bushel corn per acre. Now we're with averages over 240. I think about that 8-fold increase. That's because of our ability to adapt. And I look at the same thing as Bill made the comment about the 1988 drought versus the 2012 drought. If we want to have the use of products like glyphosate or trade name Roundup at our disposal, we wouldn't have been able to no-till. we wouldn't have been able to mitigate the risk that we would have during those drought situations. So I think it's these modern innovations has given us the ability to make sure that we're adaptive and we continue to evolve and produce more production of our crops and livestock on our farms today.
So obviously you've got a lot of focus on an employee that's capturing the data in your farm operation, but Fred Yoder has joined us. Many of you know Fred from Ohio, and I'll throw this one to you, Bill, but anyone can jump in. And he says, how can we have the same sort of access and make the technology more affordable to smaller farming operations? So Bill, if you'd take a stab at that one.
Yeah, that's a great question. I really appreciate that, Fred. That's a real central function of our regional climate hub network is to ensure that that information is available to all farmers and all growers. That's one of the reasons why we work with extension like the University of Florida with this program called Agri-Climate. Really critical that small and mid-sized producers also are going to benefit from the advanced technology. And it's even more of a challenge when you go outside the US, as Kip mentioned.
And as we think about that, someone asked about, is there a role for third-party advisors? Extension service is not as widespread as it used to be. So can people work with their local co-op and using the services that Maxar is providing, or how can we get more of this information out into the field?
Well, I can take a shot at that. I think it is great that there are companies that are stepping into this space, and that is going to drive innovation and it's going to drive technological improvement. I think getting back to Fred's point about making sure that we're also rising, that everyone is also uplifted. That's sort of where the government can step in and make sure that we do have tools and access to information that's going to be available to all growers, regardless of size.
And certainly you've got a lot of information up on your website that people can access from all over the world. Another question for, excuse me, for you, either Kyle or Sean, how can visualizing these climate trends and anomalies help these agribusinesses understand and then also communicate the climate risk more effectively?
Sure, I can take that one. Yeah, I mean, so in Climate Desk, it allows you to have interactive charts, heat maps, trend lines. So instead of having to go out, sift through petabytes of climate data or spreadsheets, it allows you to quickly spot changes such as shifts in growing seasons or increased risk of drought through easy to use visualizations. So it's really, democratizing access to this wealth of climate data through a geospatially enabled platform. A lot of these data formats are in things like gridded binary or netcdf that people aren't used to knowing how to work with. So if you don't have domain knowledge and those sort of things, this tool really allows you to understand the climate trends in an easy to understand manner. So it really, through those visual insights, it enhances your understanding of climate risk, but also makes it easier to justify to stakeholders the need for proactive measures in the face of changing climate.
Thanks, Sean. One of the questioners that came in talked about the need to have more biodiversity and resiliency. And I know that we haven't really perhaps defined resiliency to the extent that some people would like. But Kip and Bill, any thoughts on what is happening to build more resiliency that you're seeing across American agriculture now? And Kip, I'd like to start with you.
Yeah, certainly. So, I mean, this topic comes up a lot, not only here in the United States, but it came up frequently in Rome as well at the FAO. And a lot of people have a lot of concern about biodiversity and loss of biodiversity. I look at one crop specifically. I look at corn, and oftentimes our ability and what we talk about now with gene editing, that's because we can go out into a field and it may be one variety, but each one of those plants that's in that field are somewhat unique to each other or different than each other. So there's a little bit more going on biodiversity than what we think of from the surface on. But the reality is farmers are, they're rotating, they're using a variety of different crops. Again, we gotta produce what fits into the system and make sure we're giving back to our communities, society, and we gotta have economic returns. So we'll do our best in meeting those biological needs and as far as diversity goes.
Bill,
Yeah.
anything care to add on that?
Sure. Yeah. Really, really good question. Natural systems are also really vulnerable to climate change, and the tools that we have are fewer because we're not like thinking about technology or those types of solutions. When it comes to resilience or biodiversity, I think it's important to note that within the US, the footprint of agriculture has remained remarkably stable over the past 3 decades. We haven't really increased overall cropland really at all in net over the last couple of decades, but we have improved productivity dramatically. And so we're able to meet emerging demands for things like biofuels with the existing footprint of agriculture. When it comes to forests, we do have some challenges because, again, within the Western states, we're seeing pretty rapid changes in climate, and we're seeing a forest system that historically has been managed to exclude fire. And so we've got some real challenges to restore forest health to the Western forest, and that means active management. And so part of, maintaining biodiversity means thinking about these systems as not static systems, but systems that we're going to need to manage to keep them providing the ecosystem services that the public is expecting.
Well, I'm going to come right at you again, Bill, because one of our questionnaires, Elon Miller, did jump in with a question about forest fires and what USDA can do to more actively manage the forests, especially in her case. She's a grape grower, and so the forest fires managed to damage the grapes as well. So we do have different crops that are impacted as well as our environment. So any other thoughts on what else USDA is doing to more actively manage?
We're doing a lot, and there's more that needs to be done. Is a huge challenge. And it would be a significant challenge even without the overlaid effects of climate change. Again, restoring forest health means going in and clearing out the overstocking of forests. It will help tremendously to find markets for that low valued material. So if we think about, emerging markets for things like biochar or renewable energy, that can help improve the economics of the whole enterprise and allow us to treat more acres. But letting things go the way they are is not going to be the solution, because we are again sort of battling against sort of some of the things that have been done historically that have really led to systems where forest health is not great because of overstocking.
Question for you, Kyle. Sean, you can feel free to jump in, but you mentioned deforestation in your case study, and there are a lot of people who are looking at that as a potential threat around the globe. What kind of data can you provide to folks who are trying to point at what practices are sustainable and where deforestation is happening, and to provide that kind of insights for policymakers as they look at these practices?
Right. So I'm not sure our climate product itself will be able to identify areas of deforestation. It's more probably better suited for like, okay, we see this area has had deforestation. It's being incorporated into the projections going forward of how it's going to impact climate. Now, Maxar itself does more with high resolution satellite imagery. We have a number of satellites in orbit that are providing that. So I know we've done some work with agencies to identify where there's been deforestation using satellite imagery, high-res imagery. But as far as the weather and climate tools, they're more looking at, what's the result of the deforestation on climate as opposed to identifying it.
Okay, thank you. More questions keep coming in, so thank you for all of those. Bill, this is one you and I had talked about a little bit, and that is dealing with risk management from Don Presser. Any thoughts on how the frequency and severity of weather events will impact access to risk management tools like crop insurance?
Yeah, so crop insurance is really critical program. It's part of the safety net for farmers, and it is really critical in light of climate change to help us manage those climate risks. The program itself has adaptation built into it, and so when RMA and when the insurance industries are setting rates for farmers, they're taking into account more recent disasters more heavily. So as the climate changes and as the risk profile for growers changes, those will be incorporated into the rates that folks see for crop insurance. And that way, the program is going to be keeping up to date in terms of climate risks. Now we're not projecting with this program. We're not saying what will future risks look like. We're really focusing on actual data, actual risk, but we're weighing the more recent climate-related losses more heavily within the program.
Thanks. A lot of people still don't understand, I think, exactly how crop insurance works. So that's always good to have that perspective.
I wouldn't say that I know exactly how crop insurance works. I don't know. But
you got a lot of other economists around there that do, I know.
Exactly.
So Kip, as we're winding up here, just leave the last question for you. Klaus wanted to know about the big changes that are going to be required here as we think differently around the climate risks and data and analytics, and what kind of incentives are there to really make these sorts of changes. I guess in my mind, the first incentive is staying in business and profitability are key. But there's also some tax credits people are starting to look towards. There was a question about the Growing Climate Solutions Act. What do you see out there as incentives for growers to make some of these changes and do a better job capturing and analyzing data?
Absolutely. I believe that the private sector should be one of the largest drivers in bringing forward incentives for farmers to actually make some of these changes to meet the marketplace. I believe it's the private sector that's going to develop these new innovations. They're the ones that are going to own the IP. They have the capital invest. Farmers have to make these individual decisions on their own. It needs to be voluntary. But I can see where, some of the clients we work with today, we're doing private deals with them on the way we manage our farm, the way we collect data, and how we can prove how sustainable we are compared to maybe somebody else. And we're able to capture a premium for that. So I'm a big believer that, the government has a certain role to play, maybe setting some standards in here. But at the end of the day, I want the incentives to come between, the end user and us, the producer, because I'm a big believer in the private sector doing a lot of the work here.
Thank you very much for that. As we wrap up, Kyle, I was just going to give you a chance to make a final comment before we close in terms of that you're going to be sending some additional information out to everybody, correct?
That's right. So we have an 18-month climate outlook that we update. I believe it's every month. So we're going to send out the latest report to all attendees just to kind of understand, the type of information that's available out there for, projecting climate and for agriculture.
Right. So you'll be hearing more. And as I mentioned, a recording of this webinar will be available on our website probably within the next day. And so I'd like to wrap up here just by thanking everybody, all of our panelists. You did a great job. Thank you. Kudos to all of you for your presentations and for answering all the questions. For all the participants, thank you for attending. We want to make sure you also have an opportunity to see what we do here at Agri-Pulse and following these issues every day. So if you have a chance, you can scan this QR code and use that in order to get a free trial and see what we do for a full month. Or you can go to our subscription link. I'd also like to thank Maxar for making this webinar possible, and for our team that's behind the scenes here on this webinar for doing everything to make sure this runs so smoothly. we'll be, as I mentioned, you'll be getting an email from us within the next day as soon as the webinar is available, and be on the lookout for additional information from Maxar. So with that, we're going to go ahead and end up. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.